How I realized I was just their ATM, not family. Cutting toxic ties. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's video, we're diving deep into the powerful concept of cutting toxic ties, how it can free us from the emotional burdens of toxic relationships and help us find peace and happiness. If you've ever felt trapped in a cycle of guilt or manipulation, this video is for you. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, Silent Wars, for more insightful content on personal growth and emotional healing. Don't forget to ring the bell to stay updated. The burden of responsibility. Lucas, at just 27 years old, had always prided himself on being the reliable son, the dependable sibling. He grew up with the belief that family always came first, that helping out when they needed him was not just expected, but a duty he had embraced wholeheartedly. From an early age, Lucas understood the weight of responsibility. He knew that, as the oldest son, much of the family's future seemed to rest on his shoulders. His parents, although well-meaning, often struggled with finances. His mother had not worked for years, and his father, while employed, never seemed to manage the household budget well enough to avoid the constant financial emergencies that seemed to pop up without warning. At first, Lucas didn't mind. After all, he was just starting his career in technology, a field that promised steady growth, and he was in a place where he could help. His salary, while not extraordinary, was enough to cover the unexpected costs his family faced: bills, repairs, tuition for his younger siblings, and emergency medical expenses. He was happy to be able to step up, to alleviate some of the stress his parents were constantly under. To him, it was part of being a good son. His family, in return, was grateful at least. That's what Lucas thought. His parents expressed their appreciation, though sometimes it felt like they were taking his help for granted. As he continued to pour his money and time into his family's needs, the gratitude seemed to fade. What started as an occasional request for assistance slowly evolved into an unspoken expectation. It wasn't, "Lucas, could you help us out this month?" anymore. It became, "Lucas, the rent is due. Please send the money to Mom's account by next week." And then, there was no asking. There was just a demand, a command almost, that Lucas would pay the bills because he could. In his heart, Lucas never questioned it at first. He didn't have a spouse or children of his own, so what better way to use his resources than to help the family that had always been there for him? The idea of sacrificing for his parents and siblings felt natural, even noble. He was in a position to help, so why not? It was his duty, right? But over time, the weight of responsibility began to grow unbearable. The phone calls came more frequently, the demands more specific and urgent. What once felt like an occasional burden transformed into a constant pressure. The requests were no longer for help. They were for Lucas to solve the family's financial problems. They expected him to cover rent month after month, to help pay off debts that seemed to never go away, and to take care of emergencies that, to Lucas, seemed to pop up with suspicious frequency. The occasional act of kindness became an ongoing commitment, one that drained his emotional resources. What began as a sense of pride, of fulfilling his role as the reliable family member, soon became a source of resentment. Lucas felt trapped in a cycle where his needs were always secondary, where his family's expectations overshadowed his own desires and dreams. His personal aspirations, his career goals, even his own well-being began to take a back seat to their demands. There were nights when Lucas sat at his kitchen table, staring at his bank account, wondering if it would ever end. Would his family ever be able to stand on their own 2 feet? Would they ever stop asking for more than he could give? Lucas also began to notice the disparity between his life and the lives of his siblings. His younger brother, Ethan, who was just starting his career, and Katie, his younger sister, Both lived at home and had no real financial responsibilities. Yet, they seemed to spend their money freely: new clothes, outings with friends, vacations without a care. And Lucas was the one who was expected to hold everything together, to fund their lifestyle, even as they took no initiative to contribute financially. He couldn't help but feel exhausted and, eventually, resentful. Why was he the one always picking up the slack? It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect, or rather, the lack of it. Lucas had been the family's financial lifeline for so long that he couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked him how he was doing or what he wanted. It was always about what they needed from him. And as the years went on, he began to feel like a tool, a means to an end, rather than a beloved son or brother. As Lucas reached a breaking point, he realized that his role in the family had become one of obligation rather than choice. He had become the family's default solution to every problem. No one asked if he was okay with it anymore. It was just expected that he would help. The exhaustion, the resentment, the constant feeling of being taken advantage of, it all built up, and Lucas realized that he was no longer the same person he used to be. He had become someone who was defined by his willingness to help others at the expense of his own happiness. This realization left him with a heavy heart, but also a growing sense of determination. He knew he had to make a change. He knew he couldn't keep sacrificing his own well-being just to meet the expectations of a family that wasn't truly seeing him anymore. What had once been an act of love and duty had slowly turned into a prison of obligation. And now, it was time to break free. For the first time in years, Lucas began to think about himself not as the dependable son, but as an individual with his own goals, dreams, and needs. He wasn't sure how to start, but the first step was clear. He couldn't keep letting his family use him without any regard for his own feelings. The weight of responsibility had grown too heavy to bear, and Lucas knew it was time to set boundaries and reclaim his life. It would be a difficult journey, but one he was ready to take. The path to reclaiming his happiness and independence had finally begun. The hidden truth about family. Lucas had always believed that family meant everything. Growing up, he had been taught that it was his duty to support his loved ones in their time of need. His parents were always struggling financially, and as the eldest son, Lucas took it upon himself to help. Whether it was paying the rent, covering a medical bill, or assisting with his younger siblings' tuition fees, he never hesitated to step in. He had a stable job in technology and, although it wasn't a fortune, his income was enough to make ends meet for himself and his family. It made him feel good to be the reliable one, the one they could count on in tough times. But what Lucas didn't realize was that this constant support, this reliance on him to fix their problems, would eventually take a toll on him emotionally. Over time, his sacrifices began to feel like more than just acts of love or responsibility. They started to feel like an obligation. His family had grown accustomed to his generosity, and the requests for money became more frequent and more demanding. It was as if there was no end to the number of emergencies that needed his financial assistance. For months, Lucas did not question the situation. His parents and siblings needed him, and he was happy to help. After all, family should take care of each other, right? But things changed when Lucas received a call from his younger sister, Laura. She mentioned a resort in passing, and when Lucas asked for clarification, Laura's response was vague and dismissive. Something about the conversation felt off. It wasn't until later that Lucas would uncover the truth that would shatter his trust in his family. The revelation came one evening when Lucas was texting his sister casually, and she sent him a photograph that would change everything. In it, Lucas saw his parents, brother and sister, lounging by a pool at a luxurious resort. They were enjoying drinks in the sun, smiling and laughing as if life was perfect. But Lucas wasn't with them. He hadn't been invited. And worse, He hadn't been told about this trip, a trip that, unbeknownst to him, his family had used the money he had sent them to fund. Lucas's heart sank as the realization hit him. While he had been working hard to make sure his family's bills were paid, sacrificing his own savings and financial freedom to help them stay afloat, they had been living a life of luxury behind his back. The money he had sent them to cover rent, utilities, and emergencies had been used to fund their vacation, and he was left out in the cold. He couldn't believe it. The very people he had spent years supporting, the people he had always trusted and sacrificed for, had been deceiving him all along. Feelings of betrayal washed over him. He felt like a fool, manipulated for so long. For years he had been the one to step in when they needed him, never once questioning their constant demands for money. But now he realized that his family had taken advantage of his kindness and generosity. It was no longer about helping them out of a tough spot. It was about exploiting him, using him as their personal ATM without any regard for his own life, his own needs, or his own boundaries. Lucas's initial reaction was disbelief. He couldn't understand how they could do this to him. He had been so open, so willing to help, and yet they had betrayed his trust in the worst possible way. His parents, who had always promised to support him in his own life and goals, had instead taken advantage of his hard work and sacrifice. And now, they were enjoying a vacation while he was left to clean up the mess they had created. The anger began to boil inside of him. How could they do this? How could they use him like this? He had spent years helping them without question, and this was the gratitude he received in return. He was furious, not just at the deception, but at the humiliation of it all. He felt like he had been used for years, and now it was clear to him that his family had never truly respected him. To them, he was just a source of income, a tool to get what they needed. Lucas decided it was time to confront his family. He called his mother, but when she answered, her tone was dismissive, as if his anger was an inconvenience. She explained that they needed the trip because they had been stressed, but her words only fueled his anger. How could she possibly justify this? And then, when he told her he knew about the resort, her response was chilling. She told him he would have ruined the mood if he had been there, as if his presence would have been a burden on their vacation. The sheer entitlement, the lack of remorse, it left Lucas speechless. That night, Lucas sat in his apartment staring at his phone, flooded with emotions. He felt betrayed, angry, and humiliated. The weight of years of support suddenly felt like a heavy burden. He had given everything for them, and this was how they repaid him. But in the silence of his apartment, something inside Lucas began to change. He realized he couldn't keep living this way. He couldn't keep allowing them to take advantage of him. The next morning, he made a decision. He cut ties with his family. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. No angry shouting or screaming. He simply stopped sending money. He canceled the automatic transfers he had set up to support them and blocked them on his phone. They had crossed a line, and Lucas was done. The emotional toll this betrayal took on Lucas was immense, but in the end, it was the freedom he gained from stepping away that helped him move forward. He had finally taken control of his life. He no longer had to bear the weight of his family's expectations. The anger, the humiliation, the sense of betrayal, they were all still there. But Lucas knew that he had made the right choice. His family had used him, manipulated him, and now it was time for him to live his life for himself. Lucas's story is a painful yet empowering reminder that sometimes we have to let go of toxic relationships, even when they come from the people we love the most. It's not about the money or the help we give, it's about respect. And when that's no longer there, it's time to walk away. The call that changed everything. Lucas sat in his apartment, phone in hand, reeling from the discovery that his family had used the money he had sent to help them for a lavish vacation. The shock of it all left him feeling like his world was shattering. For years, he had given his family everything: money, time, and endless support. He had believed that he was doing the right thing, that family was supposed to take care of each other, that his sacrifices were a way of showing love. But now, everything he had known was in question. His kindness, his loyalty, it had all been taken for granted. When he confronted his mother about the vacation, he had hoped for a real conversation, maybe a heartfelt apology, a moment of understanding where she would acknowledge what she had done. But what he received instead was far from what he had imagined. His mother picked up the phone, sounding strangely calm, as if this conversation was just another trivial matter to her. She didn't acknowledge the gravity of the situation. Lucas had expected an explanation, some sense of accountability, but instead, he was met with excuses and deflections. "You would have ruined the mood," his mother said. Her words hit him like a slap in the face. It wasn't even the fact that she had gone on the vacation without him, without even telling him about it. It wasn't just about the money, or the fact that she had used his generosity for something as frivolous as a luxury trip. No, it was her attitude, the dismissiveness in her voice, the way she belittled his feelings as if they didn't matter. Ruined the mood? Lucas thought to himself. He couldn't believe it. His entire life had been about supporting them, making sure they were okay, even when it meant putting his own needs aside. And now, when he finally confronted them about the betrayal, his mother couldn't even muster an ounce of empathy. Instead, she justified it, trivializing his concerns as if they were just an inconvenience to her. The anger that had been building inside Lucas for weeks finally exploded. It wasn't just about the vacation anymore. It wasn't just about the money or the lies. It was about the way his family had treated him for years. They had taken advantage of his kindness and generosity without any regard for his well-being. And now, when he finally spoke up, they dismissed his feelings like they were nothing. But there was also something else that settled into Lucas's chest, a deep sense of disappointment. This was the part that hurt the most. It wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that his family had never truly respected him. Despite everything he had done for them, despite the years of support, they still saw him as nothing more than a resource, a means to an end. It was a painful moment of clarity. Lucas had spent so much of his life trying to be the reliable one, the one who always stepped up when his family needed help. He had always believed that his sacrifices were what families did for each other. But now, after everything, he realized that his family hadn't seen it that way. They had never seen him as a partner, as an equal. They had only seen him as a tool to use when they were in need. As the conversation went on, Lucas's initial shock turned into a mixture of frustration and sorrow. He had always been the one who gave, the one who helped, the one who sacrificed. He had worked hard for everything he had, and he had done it not just for himself, but for his family as well. And yet, here they were, his mother, his father, his siblings treating him like his contributions meant nothing. The conversation ended as quickly as it had begun, with his mother offering no real apology, no acknowledgement of how wrong she had been. She simply brushed him off, telling him that he was being too dramatic. She continued to justify her actions, claiming that the vacation was just what they needed. But to Lucas, it was clear now. His family wasn't interested in hearing his side. They had no intention of changing. And in that moment, he realized something he had been avoiding for years. His family didn't care about him the way he cared about them. Lucas hung up the phone and sat there in silence, his heart heavy with disappointment. He had done everything for them, and now he was left with nothing but a deep sense of betrayal and hurt. The weight of years of giving, of being the reliable one, now felt suffocating. He had spent his whole life trying to prove his worth to them, to show them that he was more than just a provider. But it was all in vain. For the first time, Lucas realized that he was done. He didn't want to be part of this toxic cycle anymore. He didn't want to be the one who was always expected to fix things, to pay for everything, to make the family's problems disappear. He had been used, and he couldn't take it anymore. The realization that his family didn't truly respect him, despite everything he had done for them, was the final blow. The anger he had felt earlier turned into something else: freedom. He knew that he had to break away, to stop letting them manipulate him and use him for their own benefit. It was time to stop being the one who always gave. It was time for him to take control of his own life, to start living for himself instead of constantly sacrificing for others. This call had changed everything. Lucas knew it was time to step away from his family and reclaim his life. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for sure: he was no longer willing to let his family's expectations define him. He was finally going to take care of himself, and that was the most important decision he had ever made. The final decision: cutting ties. After months of constant financial support, emotional manipulation, and feeling used by his family, Lucas had finally reached a breaking point. He had spent years stepping in to save them, always the reliable one, the dependable son who could be counted on to bail them out. But the recent discovery of his family's betrayal, using the money he sent them for a luxury vacation while they had claimed they couldn't pay their bills, was the final straw. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the lack of respect, the constant demands, and the realization that his kindness had been taken for granted. Lucas had always thought that helping his family was his duty. His upbringing had taught him that family comes first, that sacrifices are part of the love and responsibility you have for the people closest to you. But over time, that sense of duty had morphed into an unrelenting obligation. He had started to feel more like a personal ATM than a loved one. His family had come to expect him to cover their expenses without ever considering how it impacted him. They had never truly appreciated his sacrifices, and when he had tried to set boundaries, they had rejected them, manipulating him with guilt and emotional blackmail. The betrayal hit hardest when he realized that his family, who had always painted him as the dependable one, were the same people who had secretly planned a vacation without even thinking to include him. It wasn't just the financial burden, it was the lack of acknowledgement and gratitude that left him feeling devalued. He had given them everything, and yet, they had continued to take, without giving back. The final straw came when his mother justified their actions by saying he would have ruined the mood of their vacation. That moment of realization left Lucas reeling. It was clear that he had been manipulated for years, treated as nothing more than a source of financial support. He had been so focused on doing the right thing, on being the perfect son and brother, that he had neglected his own needs and boundaries. But now, Lucas was done. He wasn't going to play the part anymore. It was time for him to stop being their go-to safety net. The decision was difficult, but it was also liberating. Lucas knew that the path forward meant cutting ties with his family, at least for the time being. He had to protect himself, his mental health, and his own sense of self-worth. So, he made the decision to cancel all the automatic bank transfers he had set up to help his parents. No more payments for their bills, no more covering the cost of emergencies, no more rescuing them from the consequences of their poor decisions. With a sense of finality, he also blocked their numbers. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, nor did he want a confrontation. He simply wanted peace, space, and the freedom to live his life without being constantly pulled back into the toxic cycle of manipulation. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming control over his own life. He didn't owe them anything. As soon as his family realized the money wasn't coming in anymore, the panic set in. His phone was bombarded with messages, calls, and voicemails. The guilt trip started immediately. "We're going to lose the house. We don't know what to do without you. You're turning your back on us." His father left him an angry voicemail, accusing him of being childish. His mother sent tear-filled messages begging him to come back and help. His siblings, too, jumped in, trying to pressure him into reinstating his support. They didn't understand why he had stopped helping, why he had made such a drastic decision. It was overwhelming. The emotional fallout of cutting ties was intense. Lucas felt a mixture of empowerment and anxiety. He had finally taken control, but now he was faced with the emotional fallout of his actions. He had to wrestle with the guilt of walking away from his family guilt that was being fed by their manipulative tactics. But deep down, he knew he had made the right decision. He had given them everything, and now it was time to give to himself. The messages continued to flood in, but Lucas remained firm. He didn't reply to the guilt-laden texts. He didn't respond to the angry accusations. For the first time, he felt the weight of years of emotional exhaustion lift off his shoulders. He wasn't responsible for their failures. He wasn't their personal ATM. He wasn't their emotional crutch. At times, Lucas did feel a pang of anxiety. What if his family never understood? What if they never accepted his decision? What if he was seen as the villain in their eyes? But then he remembered everything he had sacrificed for them and how they had never truly appreciated it. He had done enough. He didn't owe them an explanation. In the days and weeks that followed, the silence was deafening, but it was also incredibly peaceful. For the first time, Lucas wasn't constantly worried about their needs. He didn't have to adjust his schedule for their emergencies. He was free to live his life on his terms. And while it was difficult, there was a sense of relief in knowing that he had finally taken the reins of his own life. He had learned that true self-respect came from setting boundaries, even when it meant walking away from family. Lucas wasn't sure what the future held. He didn't know if he would ever repair his relationship with his family, but he did know that, for the first time in a long time, he was taking care of himself. He was living for himself, not for the expectations of others. And that, he realized, was the most important thing he could do for his well-being. The confrontation and breaking point. When Lucas decided to cut ties with his family, he knew the consequences wouldn't be easy. He had given them so much of himself for so long, financially, emotionally, and physically, that he braced himself for the backlash. Yet, nothing could have prepared him for the storm that hit when they finally confronted him. His parents, his siblings, all of them came together with accusations that he was selfish, heartless, and ungrateful. They couldn't fathom why he had walked away. How could he turn his back on them after everything they had been through together? Lucas stood his ground, calm and unwavering. He could feel their anger and frustration spilling over, but he no longer felt the need to defend himself or explain his decision. Their words, once sharp and guilt-laden, no longer had the power to affect him the way they used to. In the past, their accusations would have shaken him, would have made him question his choices. But now, as he listened to their tirades, he simply realized how far he had come. Lucas had spent years being the family's ATM, the one they turned to for money every time they faced a crisis. He had been the emotional safety net, the one who always stepped up, no matter the cost to his own well-being. It hadn't always been easy, but he believed that it was his duty to take care of them. They were family after all. But the more he gave, the more they expected, and the less they appreciated. It wasn't just the financial strain that weighed on him, but the emotional toll of always being the one to bail them out, only to be taken for granted. As his family hurled accusations of selfishness at him, Lucas remained unfazed. He had been through too much to let their words affect him anymore. They had used him for years, and now that he was no longer there to pick up the pieces, they were angry. But their anger wasn't about love or concern for him, it was about control. They couldn't understand why he had stopped being their safety net. They couldn't accept that their reliable source of help had finally said no. And so, with an air of quiet determination, Lucas exposed everything. He laid it all out, every penny he had given, every emotional manipulation they had used, every demand they had made without ever considering his own needs. He didn't raise his voice or become defensive. He simply told them the truth, without apology. He wasn't angry anymore, not even with his parents or his siblings. The anger he had once felt had faded, replaced by a resolute calmness. He wasn't going to allow their manipulation to control him any longer. He spoke plainly, telling them that he had given them everything he had and more. He had sacrificed his own financial freedom to cover their bills. He had drained himself emotionally to fix their problems, and he had kept quiet, believing it was his duty. But the reality was that they had taken advantage of his kindness. They had stopped seeing him as family and instead viewed him as a tool to fix their problems. His mother's vacation with the money he had sent them was the final act of betrayal. And when he had stopped helping, they had turned on him, calling him selfish, accusing him of ruining the family. But Lucas didn't feel guilty. He didn't feel regret. For the first time, he realized that he had done the right thing. Standing up for himself, setting boundaries, and cutting ties with them wasn't selfish, it was necessary. They had drained him emotionally and financially for years, and he had finally reached his breaking point. There was no going back. As his family continued to rant and accuse him, Lucas felt a sense of liberation wash over him. The fear that once held him back, the fear of losing his family or disappointing them, had completely disappeared. He was no longer afraid of the consequences of standing up for himself. For the first time in his adult life, he was free from the weight of their expectations. He was no longer their fallback, their fixer, their ATM. He was Lucas again, someone who had a right to live for himself. The emotional manipulation, the guilt trips, the demands, it was all over now. Lucas was no longer controlled by his family's needs. He had let go of the burden that had weighed him down for so long, and in doing so, he had freed himself. There was no remorse, no second-guessing, just freedom. As the confrontation ended and his family's words faded away, Lucas knew that he had made the right decision. He was done playing the role they had assigned him. His family had crossed a line, and he was done being their emotional crutch. This was the end of the chapter. He was no longer going to live his life on their terms. And as he walked away from the confrontation, there was a quiet sense of peace. The path ahead was unknown, but for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt like he was finally in control of his own life. No more manipulation, no more guilt, no more sacrifices for a family that didn't appreciate him. He was free to live for himself. And that, in the end, was worth everything. The aftermath, a changed life. In the days following the end of his relationship with his family, Lucas found himself in an unexpected place. Peace. For so many years, his life had been defined by constant obligations to his parents and siblings. He had been their emotional and financial support, the one who always stepped in to solve their problems, no questions asked. But the moment he cut ties with them, it was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The fear of losing his family, which had haunted him for years, began to fade, replaced by an unfamiliar feeling of freedom. For weeks, there was silence. His phone stayed quiet, the messages stopped, and his family seemed to vanish from his life. In those weeks, Lucas rediscovered something he hadn't realized he had lost: himself. He began enjoying his own time, focusing on his career and his passions, without the constant stress of family demands hanging over him. No longer was he the default babysitter, the ATM, or the emotional safety net. He could make decisions based on his own desires and needs, without feeling guilty about it. It was a strange, but welcome, change. Then, one day, he received an email from his sister, Laura. Her message was heartfelt, laden with apologies and the hope that they could reconcile. She claimed that the family was falling apart without him and that they needed him back. The words felt empty to Lucas. He had heard similar things before, and he knew that the family's dependence on him wasn't about love, it was about control. His sister's plea, while genuine, was just another attempt to pull him back into the cycle of manipulation he had spent years trying to escape. At first, Lucas had to fight the urge to respond, to be pulled back into the familiar role he had played for so long, but the anger that had once fueled his decisions was now gone. It had been replaced by something stronger, a deep sense of relief and peace. His mind was clearer, free from the weight of his family's expectations. He no longer felt the constant pressure to be the one who fixed everything, to always put their needs before his own. The fear of losing his family, which had once kept him tethered to a life of sacrifice and self-neglect, no longer had a grip on him. Instead, he realized that he had the power to control his own happiness. In the past, Lucas might have apologized, even if he wasn't in the wrong, just to restore some semblance of peace. He might have caved in, offering to help his family once again, even at the cost of his own well-being. But now he saw the situation with fresh eyes. He wasn't responsible for their problems. He wasn't responsible for their happiness. His role had never been to be their emotional crutch, and it was time for them to face the consequences of their own actions without him there to pick up the pieces. As the days passed, Lucas realized how much his life had changed. He felt lighter, freer, as though a burden he hadn't even fully recognized had been removed from his back. He started doing things for himself, taking trips, spending time with friends, focusing on his work and personal growth. His life, once defined by endless sacrifices, was now his own again. He was no longer living in the shadow of his family's needs and expectations. He was living for himself, and that felt right. The relief that came with this newfound freedom was not fleeting. It was deep, rooted in the understanding that he had made the right choice for himself. His family's dysfunction, their demands, and their manipulation no longer had the power to control him. And while he still felt a sense of sadness for the way things had turned out, for the relationship he had lost, he knew that cutting ties had been the only way for him to truly heal and move forward. For the first time in his life, Lucas was not worried about what others expected of him. He wasn't waiting for a phone call or an urgent message. He was living his life on his own terms. There was no guilt, no shame, just the freedom to be who he was, without the constant weight of family obligations hanging over him. And that peace, that freedom, was worth more than he could have ever imagined. Lucas had learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is the most important, standing up for yourself, even when it means walking away from the people you love. But in the end, he discovered that the most important relationship he had was the one with himself, and that was worth everything. The final cut. Moving on. As the months passed, Lucas found himself living a life he had never imagined, one free from the emotional and financial burdens of his family. He had made the decision to cut ties, to no longer play the role of the provider and caretaker, and while the initial fear of what might come next had been overwhelming, the peace he found afterward was nothing short of transformative. His family, however, did not accept his decision as easily as he had hoped. Despite his firm resolve, they continued to reach out in a variety of ways. Social media posts appeared, filled with veiled messages designed to make him feel guilty. Family members posted photos of family gatherings and sentimental messages about family first, often with a hidden undertone of, "Why aren't you here?" The guilt trip started up again, this time with accusations of selfishness and disloyalty. They tried to manipulate him back into their lives with messages of love, but underneath, there was always a demand. But Lucas had changed. The guilt that once plagued him, guilt for not being there, for not providing, for not sacrificing his own happiness for the sake of others, was gone. For the first time, he realized he no longer cared about their judgment. It was a powerful feeling, one that freed him from the emotional chains that had bound him for so long. The guilt that had kept him trapped in a cycle of overgiving, overcaring, and over-sustaining his family was replaced by a sense of empowerment. There was no longer any doubt in his mind that he had made the right choice. He had spent years trying to please them, trying to be the perfect son, the perfect sibling, and the perfect person to depend on. But in the end, his family's expectations had only led to his own emotional exhaustion. They had taken him for granted, assuming that he would always be there to support them, no matter the cost to his own well-being. They hadn't appreciated his sacrifices or the toll it had taken on him. The moment he stopped fulfilling their expectations, he realized just how little they truly valued him. Lucas didn't just stop helping them financially, he stopped letting them take up space in his mind. The messages that once would have made him second-guess his decision no longer affected him. He had stopped waiting for their approval. He had stopped feeling responsible for their happiness. His mind was clear, and for the first time in his life, his emotions were his own. He was no longer weighed down by the burden of their needs. What surprised Lucas the most was the sense of peace that followed his decision. At first he had feared the silence, wondering if it would feel like abandonment or if it would bring a deep sense of loneliness. But instead, it was liberating. No longer did he have to answer their calls. No longer did he have to feel guilty for putting his own life on hold to help them. He was free to focus on his career, his health, and his personal happiness. The emotional drain that had once consumed him was replaced by a newfound energy that he could now direct toward his own goals. In the absence of his family's demands, Lucas found room to breathe. He started making decisions based on his own desires, not based on what others needed from him. He began to set boundaries, to say no when it was necessary, and to embrace his own desires without guilt. It wasn't that he didn't care about his family anymore. It was that he had finally learned to care about himself first, and that made all the difference. Now, Lucas was moving forward. His life was no longer defined by his role as a caregiver, as someone who was expected to sacrifice for others. He had put himself first for the first time in years, and the difference was like night and day. His confidence grew, and he began to enjoy life in ways he never had before. The weight of responsibility had been lifted, and he was free to live for himself. For Lucas, the final cut wasn't just about severing ties with his family, it was about reclaiming his life. He had finally broken free from the chains of obligation, and in doing so, he had found something far more valuable: peace. The emotional burden that had once dictated his every move was now gone, and in its place, he had found a life that was his own to live. And with that peace came the freedom to pursue his own happiness, unencumbered by the expectations and demands of others. Lucas knew he could never go back to the way things were. The family he had once tried so hard to please was still there, but he no longer felt the need to sacrifice himself for their comfort. He was in control of his own life now, and for the first time, that felt like enough. One of the most important lessons from Lucas's story is the significance of setting boundaries and prioritizing your own well-being. Throughout his life, Lucas gave selflessly to his family, often putting their needs above his own. He believed it was his duty to support them, but in doing so, he neglected his own happiness and peace. It wasn't until he made the difficult decision to stop, to say no, and to stop being the go-to person for everyone's problems, that he realized the immense freedom and relief that comes from putting oneself first. This lesson is particularly important as we age, when we may often feel a sense of duty or responsibility to others, especially family. However, it's vital to recognize that our own health, happiness, and peace are just as important. Setting boundaries isn't about being selfish, it's about self-respect and ensuring we have the energy and emotional strength to enjoy the time we have left. Letting go of guilt and stepping back from unhealthy relationships or obligations can lead to a more fulfilling, peaceful life, where we can truly live for ourselves. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful and insightful, don't forget to like and subscribe to Silent Wars. Your support means a lot to us. We'll be back soon with more content to help you live your best life. Take care and remember, putting yourself first is always the right choice.